Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to the Dish with Dina podcast. I am so happy to have you join us again this week. Today, my guest is Jason Birnbaum. Jason and I dish about everything from Crohn's disease to the coronavirus and fermented foods to family dinners. Jason has had an ever-evolving career path from being a former sleep specialist to a current life insurance producer. So sit back, enjoy the conversation, and let's dish. Jason Birnbaum, welcome to the Dish with Dina podcast. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend with me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Dina.
Thank you. So much like all of these podcast episodes have been going, I always start off with an origin story. And if you don't mind, if you remember, sharing with our listeners, how did we meet, how we came across each other?
Well, I am lifelong friends with your life partner, Mark.
Yes.
And I mean, literally, he's born, I think it's the day after my brother. Mm-hmm. And we all grew up in the same community together, the Sephardic Jewish Greek community in Queens. And so he knows me since the day I'm born. So, and then once you entered into his life, we obviously met at some point.
Yes, we did. I've been with him. I don't think I shared this with anybody. I've been with him, oh gosh, what is this now? 18 years.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's got to be about 20 years.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So that's many decades have passed us in that time, but we all look fantastic, just FYI.
We do.
So that's true. I knew him. I knew of you guys. And then thankfully at some point we did all meet in person, and we've been keeping in touch, which I'm so grateful for, because the reason why you're on this podcast is because you answered a request of mine when I was looking for guests to come on. My purpose in having the podcast is, yes, to talk mostly about food and health and wellness, and but also learning about people's cultural backgrounds and upbringings and earliest food memories, et cetera, and not necessarily to have it just within the constructs of my colleagues. I want to make sure everybody who I know, or maybe even some strangers who are interested in talking about their lives, because we all eat and we all have a story to share. So if you don't mind, on that note, would you take us back to so many years ago and tell us a little bit about how you grew up, what that dynamic was with your family, and any traditions that you remember?
Right. So I'm ethnically, I'm mostly Hungarian, but my mom is Greek and her father is Greek. Everybody else, all my other grandparents are Hungarian. Mm-hmm. But, as with most cultures, we followed my mother's culture, and my mom's mom followed her husband's culture. So they met in the liberation camps during the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother was a teenager when she went in. She knew nothing about food, nothing about cooking, nothing about housekeeping, taking care of a family, any of that stuff. And after the war, they had a choice of where to go. They went back to Greece. And so my grandmother learned all Greek food and Greek culture, and that's what I grew up with.
Right.
So, we were always a foodie family in some ways, although my dad was a horrible eater for my entire childhood. Meat and potatoes. As long as it was meat and potatoes, he would eat it. But I was always a very, I was always very willing to try things. And I can remember, and my dad always likes to talk about to this day, how if we would go to a diner, let's say, where they have a million things to choose from, I would order something and my dad would be like, "Did you ever have that?" And I would say no. And he's like, "Well, how do you know you're going to like it?" And I would say, "I don't, but I'm going to find out." Because he was worried, because, with your children, when they don't eat, then you eat their food and you give them your thing. And he wasn't about to do that. So, and other than really only one time that I can remember, did I not like what I tried. And funny enough, it was actually a Greek dish. It was pasticcio. They told me it was like lasagna, and it's not like lasagna. So when it tasted the nutmeg and cinnamon, and I was like, this is just weird. So it was the only thing I didn't eat. And I think my mom ate it, and I had whatever she had ordered.
So you made the commitment to be true to yourself by trying all these different dishes, and you knew the consequences would be, I have to finish it regardless.
Yeah, or at least make a good attempt.
That is so funny.
So I always had different things, and my dad, who was a horrible eater, eventually he in his business, he was a beer and soda distributor, and it was a family business, and we sold it to some other people who were Russian, and then my dad actually stayed partners with them, and they would invite him. And I don't know if you know about Russian culture and Russian eating. They do these huge banquets, and they would invite him all the time to come out to restaurants, and he would never go because he was afraid he wouldn't have anything to eat.
Oh.
And I was like, Dad, these are your partners. These people are important in your life. You need to go. And he's like, but what am I going to eat? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what they eat. But first of all, they've been eating it for hundreds of years and no one has died. So try something, chew, 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 swallow. If you don't like it, don't eat it and eat something else. And I remember he came home and he was like, it was great because they had lamb chops, which is his favorite thing in the world. And caviar, which is oddly enough he had already liked. So he mostly and he ate snails for the first time, which he thought was fantastic. So it was that changed his life, and all of a sudden my dad became a more adventurous eater as well. So
wow, later in life. See, this is interesting to me because I do often like to hear about, in the childhood that you're able to have kind of a diverse background with being taken to different things. Like in your case, it was the diner. It was one place, but you got to choose from so many different things on the menu. Other people might have cross cultures in their own families and being taught different recipes and cooking. Other people said they used to go to like farmers markets with their parents and so on. So you had very early on some opportunities to really embrace and find out what you enjoyed and what you didn't necessarily enjoy, which is so funny about the pasticcio, because you're correct. It's more like a pasta pie and it's on the sweeter side. And so if anybody's not aware, it's like a bechamel sauce, which is like a white sauce that's in there. So not very lasagna-ish, but I get it. I get the point they're trying to make.
Yeah. And it's ground lamb with the cinnamon and it's just, it's if you're expecting lasagna, you're going to be greatly disappointed.
That ain't it. And then in your dad's side, which by the way, maybe I should have him on this too, because that's interesting since he was so set with just like, I know what I know what I like, and I'm not venturing out on that, but then kind of getting nervous because this then brings into the discussion of socializing, right? I'm going to be offered the opportunity to go mix with my business partners, or if I'm just, out in an event. And for people who have kind of very particular eating habits about them, that can become kind of a traumatic experience. It's not fun for them to venture off. And so I'm glad that you gently encouraged him. I'm glad that he tried some things and did find, some things that he enjoyed. But then also the mere fact was, it was an event. It was a place for everybody to be there and engage. And that's also what's cool about these types of food related functions is it's an opportunity for people to mingle and get to know each other in that respect. So that's nice. And
what's interesting is that like my kids, I have a 9-year-old and an almost 6-year-old, if I let her live that long.
Yes.
They're horrible eaters. My little one is a little more adventurous and she'll try things. But generally they have very, very like limited choices of things they'll eat. And it concerns me. And just talking about my dad now, it does give me continued hope that they'll eventually come out of it.
Right.
But it's funny when they were like this from the beginning. And early on, I found a book called French Kids Eat Everything.
Yes. I
forget the name of the author. It's a fabulous book for anyone who has kids that are this way, which it seems more and more kids are these days. I don't know what that says about parenting today, but one of the things they point out is that in France, if you're not a good eater, you will not do well in business because you're expected to eat. And if you're a picky eater, they think there's something wrong with you.
Interesting.
And so this woman who wrote the book was all of a sudden confronted with growing up in Canada and moving with her husband, who was French, to a small town and having children who were very picky. All of a sudden, like people were like shaming her. And she was like, I need to do something because my children are going to have no friends and then they're going to have no future. And she found a way she basically re-educated them as you would educate a French child, a French baby, and started, with all the sauces and everything and working their way up, and they became good eaters. Unfortunately, I couldn't get my now ex-wife, I couldn't get her to jump on the bandwagon with it.
Right. It is a very tricky thing. By the way, while you're talking, I looked her up. It's Karen, if I'm saying it correctly, Le Billon, Billon, for anyone listening who wants to look into that. I have heard of that book. And that's funny too, because of I mean, was this, scientific studies done, but French specific ways, and the different cultures that we have as far as the North American, eating habits too. Do we see things like that happen? It's possible. I teach a couple of undergrad classes where we do talk about engaging children in earlier experiences, and then also kind of being conscientious if you do have picky eaters of what the responsibility is of the caregiver's role and what the responsibility is of the child, and understanding your child's not going to necessarily starve themselves as long as there's food available, and that they have some sort of innate ability to self-monitor. And it does take many, many tries for children to embrace different types of flavors, and they tend to like saltier things and sweeter things and not so much bitter things. So you have to be really patient, but to kind of go, I was gonna say, to kind of go into it and be like, okay, I just read this book. We got to reframe everything. Let's see, because you want success for your children to come, obviously, as they age, but then you also have your dad who was kind of an example too. Like, it's okay. You can still be somewhat successful in business at that point, even if you were a picky eater.
Right. Yeah. And, it's hard because I have a psychology background, and it's in, cognitive behavioral psychology. And I know the right things to do, but it's one of those, physician heal thyself.
Totally.
I get so frustrated, and I know, okay, I have to, make the choices available and encourage trying, but, don't force it. And I find myself slamming my fists on the table. Just taste it. Just give it a chance. You'll like it. Maybe at least just try it,
Well,
it's hard.
I was brought up in the very clean plate club where we did get, yelled at for not eating everything, and also being berated that there's children starving in this world and they would be lucky to have this food. And then, obviously now that I'm in this field, I realize not the best way to approach children's eating patterns, because, especially when you're putting things on a child's plate and I'm like, hi, I'm 6. Why am I having so much food? Like, can you just maybe give me one kernel? But it's true, like, to also respect the fact that the parents maybe sometimes are also, just nervous, and making sure that you're getting fed well and nourished well. And then the waste comes into play too. We don't want people leaving things on their plate. So there's a lot of trial and error. So I really, I commend you no matter what approach you took. There's no right or wrong way. It's whatever you dealt with at the time. But did you come from that environment too? Because I'm assuming that if your mom, if she's making those types of foods back in the day, was it always like a lot? Like in my family, we fed an army that didn't exist.
Right. So yes, Jews and Italians, we feed for
very similar
for the rest of the family and neighbors that might come for dinner,
just in case somebody pops over.
And just to enter into it, I was quite lucky that my mom is an excellent cook.
Yeah.
I've been to lots of friends' houses where they're like, oh, my mom's a great cook, and then I'm like, I sit down, I'm like,
not so
really, right? But no, I never really got that from my parents, but it was never really an issue. We ate our dinner, we ate our meals. But I did get it from my grandmother, the one who was a concentration camp survivor. And she added an extra layer to that. She didn't say there were children starving. She would say there are children starving, and I was one of them.
Right.
She ate grass. They gave them grass soup in concentration camp.
Right.
And
if that doesn't do it for you, right? Like,
so
if that doesn't guilt you into it.
And I always think about that now, because I have a fridge full of leftovers, but I'm single now, and before I was married, I do a lot of cooking, and one of my biggest problems is that I am also, like my mother, a very good cook.
Yeah.
And so I love my food, and oftentimes I'll look at it and be like, I really want a little more, but then I don't have enough left over for a full meal, and then I end up eating all of it.
Right.
And I always kind of wonder also, like, did that guilt from my grandmother enter into it, where, like, if I'm out, I need to finish what I had. I need to eat it. I need to eat it all. So I don't know.
Yes. Well, listen, I was going to say, with your background, we could definitely dive into all of this for many hours to come. But since this is a podcast, I'm trying to stick to a time schedule. I did want to say, though, so the way that I am recording all of these episodes are in whatever random order that they're going to eventually be published. But my point is right now it is July. We are celebrating what is technically National Culinary Arts Month, and I wanted to talk a little bit about I wanted to talk a little bit about your foray, and if any of those experiences, as you kind of alluded to, play a role in you're feeling comfortable with experimenting and cooking and tasting and understanding flavors and how things work, and how comfortable, how open, how flexible you are to making mistakes in the kitchen. And then if your children also play a role in that as well, do they reap the benefits, whether, but assuming if they're picky eaters, they might not necessarily want what you're making. So walk us through a little bit about like how you're finding yourself in that realm now.
Okay, so I mean, starting as a child, I was always very interested in food, and I always helped my mom, and I always watched her cook. And my mom suffered from frequent migraines, debilitating migraines, days at a time, and would have them, several a week. It was often, really bad. And actually, it's been a lifelong journey to solve them. And she discovered that a lot of it was food triggers.
Right.
And, she's in her 70s and still working it all out. But by the time I was 12, I mean, I was cooking dinners for my family. I was cooking, full on meals. And so I became very experimental. There wasn't, we didn't have the Food Network then.
Right.
But there was the Frugal Gourmet, who I loved.
There was totally the Frugal Gourmet. I know exactly who you're talking about.
And there was Julia Child.
Yes.
And there was this one German lady whose name I forget, that used to be on, she would be on a guest on Good Morning America sometimes. And I remember Good Morning America was doing a live shot in Flushing Meadow Park, which was blocks from my home. And I went early in the morning to go see her. And I waited around and I waved out to her and I told her, I was like, I made she had made like, it was like some sort of meat with like a mustard sauce roast. And I told her I made that, and she was so happy and she was so excited. And, so I was always very interested in food. And when I was in college studying psychology, all the upperclassmen I knew were graduating to go home and be waiters and waitresses, because you can't really get a job with an undergraduate in psychology. And I was really, really getting depressed and down on what my future prospects were. And I was calling my parents a lot from school. And they were like, look, you've taken all your liberal arts courses. You have lots of interests. Think about what you really love to do. And if there's a career in it, we'll support you, like with everything you've done, like good parents. And so I thought about it for several weeks, and I finally came back and I was like, I know what I want to do. And they were like, what? I said, I want to be a chef. And they were like, no. And I was going to school right across the river from Culinary Institute. And I had a friend who was there, and I would go visit him. So they said no. And they were like, finish your degree. And then if you want, we'll send you to culinary school anywhere in the world. And sure enough, I got my psychology degree, and I got a job right out of undergrad, working in psychology. So that set my career for a while.
We'll support you on anything but that.
Right. Yeah. My grandmother was like, oh my God, you were going to be a doctor. Now you're going to be a butcher. And you're going to work at Burger King. And I was like, well, I'd like to think I'm a little better than that. I can get a job.
I love the progression of thought there. Well, that's something that you and I have in common too. I don't think I knew that. I also was oh my gosh, I used to love sitting down at 10 or 11 years old and just watching, back in the day we had 3 channels, I think it was. Right. And I think it was channel 13 or whatever public broadcasting system show. Yeah. And they would have the great chefs of the world. They would have, the Frugal Gourmet for sure. There was Julia Child. There was a guy named Pasquale who had like a cucina espressa, and he would do all of these great Italian dishes. And I would watch that much like my childhood counterparts were watching Bugs Bunny on television. Right. And I would soak up all that knowledge. And I loved cooking and experimenting. And then in my older years, before I decided where I wanted to go for college as well, I was looking into culinary school programs, and they're very expensive. A lot of them were. And also we lived in New Jersey, and a lot of those were in New York City. So I was being held back a little bit from venturing across the river because I had very strict parents. But what I ended up doing was I did take a bunch of, so I didn't obviously go into culinary school, but I took a bunch of classes. Like I took a knife skills class and a saucing class and a pastry class. Did you ever get any formal training at all in those things? But never. You're just a self-taught chef.
Self-taught.
Yeah. And
I've seen courses, Sourdough and
right.
other companies, they'll offer courses, and like I'll watch the videos and I'm like, yeah, I already know all that
I do.
stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that you've been cooking right now that you've kind of mastered, or that you're looking to experiment with now that we have seasonal changes and things that are more available to us? Obviously the bounty grows in the summertime than it does in the
Right.
winter.
And where I live, I'm in central New Jersey. I'm
Mm-hmm.
surrounded by farms, so I
Mm-hmm.
can get tons of farm fresh stuff. But really, Corona
Yeah.
has made it difficult. And
Yeah.
of all the things I'm not eating, I find that I'm deficient in fresh fruits and vegetables
Right.
because you have to get them more often, and I try to limit how often I'm going to the store. But I am cooking. I am doing the Corona bread. So
Wait, what is that? Is that banana bread or no?
no, it's just baking bread. Mark Bittman had taken his version, had created his version of the no knead
Oh, yeah. Okay.
bread that you
Right.
cook in a
In a pandemic.
yeah, but you cook it in a Dutch oven
Yeah.
to simulate what happens in a professional bread baker's oven.
Gotcha.
And I had always wanted to really do that, and then it seemed like the perfect time. And apparently, a lot of people got the same idea, and all of a sudden, flour was missing and yeast was missing and all of that.
Absolutely.
So then the more I researched it, then I started to learn about creating your own starter,
Mm-hmm.
which allows you to make sourdough,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually better for digestion, which is important for me because I have Crohn's disease.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I've baked probably close to a dozen loaves of bread, and luckily my kids like that because they're very picky about their bread too.
That is amazing. Well, because of the fermentation in there, that's supporting your gut and
Exactly.
all that. Oh my gosh, that is amazing. Well, I thought for a second that you were talking, maybe it was made with like Corona branded beer, and that I was missing something, but you meant bread in the time of coronavirus.
Yeah, they call it the Corona bread or the COVID bread. Everyone's doing it.
But you're so right about that because, so we are in a time, thank goodness, I think now there's some more stocking. So yes, in addition to it being National Culinary Arts Month, we're also in the middle of a pandemic and have been so for the last 3 months. And so going to the grocery store, going to the farmers markets, finding, for those of us who do enjoy the more whole foods, it's a little bit of a struggle. And that's not to say necessarily that the packaged or frozen or, canned goods are bad in any way, but for those of us who enjoy a little bit more fresher types of fruits and vegetables, or those will expire obviously, and so those are the first ones to be gone. And then the baking thing really, I couldn't find, for my mom, I couldn't find like you said, flour. She had some cake mixes that she wanted me to purchase. Completely, the shelves were completely bare. Chocolate chips were gone. So that's what I guess people are really digging deep in there and doing a lot of baking and experimenting.
Yeah, and I'm not, I've always said I really love to cook.
Yeah.
But I'm not a baker.
Yeah.
I don't like, the only thing I really like to bake is brownies and pie. I'm big on pie. And I have, before I moved down to Central Jersey, I had to make my own pie to have what I considered a good pie. And there's actually a blueberry farm near me that sells pie, and they're one of the best I've ever had. So I don't have to bake them.
Well, that's the luxury also of being so accessible to things where it's like, listen, sometimes I just know that I have strengths in certain things, and other things I can just let go and let somebody else do it for me. And it's available to you. Excuse me. I wanted to, I don't mean to harp on the Crohn's disease for a sec, but I wanted to just at least bring up in this conversation that the discussion you said before with your mom and the migraines, the conversation you just mentioned about you and Crohn's disease, gut issues, and a lot of these trigger issues. And also I noticed sometimes skin, like eczema, they're very hard to manage with food and nutrition. And it's often very hit or miss and trial and error. And unfortunately, because they are so debilitating, that the struggle is also exasperating as well. Did you find anything that worked for you? Like, did you find at some point, like, I know what to eat and this is what works for me, and so therefore I'm just going to stick to these things? Are you still kind of experimenting?
Well, I think the experimentation never really ends.
Right.
But, with my science background, I do read a lot of journal research rather than, Time Magazine and newspapers and stuff like that.
Right.
And so I have found a lot of what works for me, because my brother also has Crohn's.
Right.
And he takes more medication than I do. He suffers more than I ever have.
Aw.
And I don't drink dairy. I don't drink milk, although I do love cheese. But I'm also lactose intolerant, so that made it easier for me to stop drinking milk.
Right.
And I eat a lot of whole grains. I don't use added sugar.
Okay.
Unless it's absolutely necessary. I drink my coffee black, no sugar.
Right.
And one of the things I've learned is the fermented foods.
Yeah.
So I pickle a lot. So I do a lot of pickled cauliflower, because cauliflower is good for you and pickling is good. So I do that a lot. I recently made my own sauerkraut. I have 2 jars of kimchi that I'm working on for the first time. I'm not really pleased with how that experiment is going, which is a little disappointing.
Gonna take a couple tries.
Yeah. But I do try to make sure I have my sources of fiber. I eat, a few prunes every morning. I eat a handful of walnuts. I try to, and it isn't just because of the Crohn's. I've just always been, I think because of my interest in food, I've been a little more health conscious. And so I always try to keep away from things that are processed.
Right.
And you asked earlier about, whether my kids have reaped the benefit. So they like chicken nuggets, as all kids seem to. And for some reason that doesn't translate into eating roasted chicken or any other form of chicken. But I'll make them breaded chicken cutlets, and it's very hit or miss. Like they'll love them for a little while and then decide they don't love them.
Right.
And they want the frozen, packaged, and they'll be good with the brand for a while, and then especially with Corona, you can't be choosy.
Yeah.
So you have to take what's in the freezer. And so, I try to get the best one I can find. And right now, the one that I have, they don't love.
Yeah, their brand loyalty. They're like, I don't care what's going on in the world. Yeah. I'm loyal to my brand. And you mentioned too the dairy and the cheese thing. I find that a lot as well, because certain cheeses are fermented, like the hard cheeses and so on. And people who are sometimes lactose intolerant or dairy sensitive do a little bit better with different types of cheeses. So it's good, because that can be very restrictive. I mean, you can be stuck in a place where you're like, I can't eat anything. I can't go out. I can't enjoy life. So I'm glad that you're finding some sense of understanding your condition and also how to manage it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I carry Lactaid everywhere I go,
just in case,
because there's dairy in almost everything, and like you said, sometimes it's hard to live without. It's hard to find options, especially if you're out with other people. So I always have to have that with me. Right. But yeah, the harder cheeses and like yogurt, like I know some people with lactose intolerance, they can eat yogurt without any problems. But if you've suffered with it, the effect is so awful. Even though it's only a limited amount of time, it's so awful. Especially it exacerbates my Crohn's. Yeah. So even if I eat something that I think is fine, I still take a Lactaid just in case. Understood. Because it's not going to hurt me.
Right.
It's just an enzyme, so it's like whatever.
Exactly, preventative. It adds that like safety component in there. So Jason, since we are talking about health and wellness right now, can I dive a little deep into some of your background knowledge about sleep?
Absolutely.
Because as a dietitian, even though people come to me for food and nutrition guidance and counseling, we always say it's never about the food, it's about the behaviors. And one of the behaviors we always try to discuss, many of them, right? So there's food, there's and nutrition, hydration, all of that kind of under that same little pillar. There is self-care, mental health, making sure that you're, staying as less stress as possible. And especially in times like this, not so easy. Physical activity or exercise, movement of any kind. And then one of the other pillars is also sleep, and sleep quantity, but also sleep quality. From your experience and what can you share a little bit about how that plays a role in just overall health, wellness, how maybe it can affect people. And then any guidance that you've learned along the time, you can spread some light on that topic.
This is what, a 6-hour podcast, right?
Yes, 6.5. We'll do part 4.
Yeah. So it's funny. The years, the dozen or so years that I worked in sleep, I became acutely aware of how little people seem to care about whether they get sleep or not. We're a very driven, our economy is very, you got to work hard and, sacrifice and do all that. And the one thing people always sacrifice is their sleep.
Right.
And it's mind-boggling because, the deleterious effects of sleep loss are so, overwhelming. And people just, even when you point it out to them, they still don't seem to care.
Yeah.
From inflammation, cognitive effects, general overall health. When I started working in sleep, I was a sleep tech, and I worked random rotating shifts. And I remember when I interviewed for the job, I said, "Wow, that's got to do something to your health." And they're like, "Well, you're young. You'll be fine. You'll overcome it." And I did for a while. And when I got to the point where all of a sudden I started getting sick all the time,
right,
I was like, "Oh, this is catching up to me. I need to stop doing these overnight shifts." And so I found a way to do more daytime work. But yeah, I mean, the role it plays is just so overwhelming. And it really encompasses every aspect of our life. A one night of sleep loss is, I forget the number, but it's something like a 20-point hit on your IQ. Temporary. You can go back to sleep and get it back. But it's and then inflammation and the effect of cortisol from poor sleep.
Right.
I'm dealing with issues myself because I discovered that I'm starting to snore, and the snoring has led to GERD, and the GERD has led to asthma. And I found that I was snoring because of my asthma. I went to the doctor about my asthma. She asked me a bunch of questions. She looked at my throat. She's like, "Well, your throat is irritated, and you're probably having GERD, and you're burning not just your esophagus but your larynx, and it's all." And I was like, "Oh my God, it's all sleep. It's all based on sleep.
Everything's
all connected."
Yeah. And so, just as a side note for anybody out there who doesn't know what GERD is, it is the gastroesophageal reflux disease. A lot of people complain it feels a little bit like heartburn coming through your throat. Sometimes there are triggers as far as like eating acid and so on, acidic foods, I should say. But in your case, it was almost the ingestion of like extra air coming into the pipes there and causing that, it sounds like. And, you brought up a point too that as I always do, I'm scribbling notes as you're talking. So a couple of different things came in. So I have read, I teach, as I said before, I teach some undergrad and grad classes. We do talk a little bit about, nervous disorders, cognition, Alzheimer's disease, and some studies that are showing that, like you were saying, erratic sleep patterns, long-term sleep patterns, you can't really make up for that lost sleep. You can't really undo the damage that's done. Exactly. And that while we're not entirely sure how the process works, and I guess it's cellular level, there's a lot of studies that are kind of doing like, electronic readings of how your brain kind of allows that time to housekeep in that way. Like it cleans up the beta myelin, whatever the hex are going on up there. And the other thing too, when you mentioned night shifts as well, like circadian rhythms come up a lot too in some of our discussions. We're looking to see how we can help people who do have night shift work in helping them understand how their body might utilize nutrition in a different way, because it's not just, typical breakfast, lunch, dinner, everything for them is shifted, but the sunlight comes in at different times for them than it does to somebody working a traditional job. And so there's a lot of good points there. And I'm really curious as to, what is coming up in the world of sleep habits and how that affects it. But you're right. It affects a lot of things, inflammation, cognition. And then, as you said too, now it's affecting your GI tract again, as if you need more stuff happening there.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I had done, when I was at the end of my career, we were doing research on memory consolidation and sleep, and I recently have seen that that field is blowing up. It's ever expanding. I mean, there's so much to know.
But sorry, go ahead.
No, it's that that people don't realize how like for young people, if you're in school and you're staying up late to study, you want to make sure you get a good night's sleep. Otherwise, everything you stayed up late to study isn't going to consolidate.
Right.
It's just going to be gone. It's fleeting. Just for general cognition, you talked about Alzheimer's and the effect on the ability for the brain to clean up and do its housekeeping. If you're not getting good sleep, you're slowly but surely going to start having cognitive deficits and memory loss.
Right. Right. And that's, of course, for anybody who's had Alzheimer's in their family lines or anybody who understands the condition, it's a scary thing. We don't want to necessarily do that. But the problem becomes, like you said before, is for a society that is very driven, pulling all-nighters. Oh, you're going home early when you leave at 5 o'clock, and people make these comments to you that, you're leaving half a day and that type of thing. It becomes a behavioral discussion. And just like nutrition, well, I mean, really just like any wellness habit, how do we go back and encourage people to prioritize that? So it really has to be coming from them, correct? Or, I mean, maybe they might not have any, I guess,
there's a vicious cycle
Yeah.
of our own motivations and our peer relationships, but also our work relationships and our job requirements. We always talk about like that guy who's the first person in the office. He gets there before the boss. That guy's up at 4:30 in the morning. And some of the biggest achievers in my current industry, they talk about they're up at 4:30 in the morning and they get their exercise and they get their reading in and they do their preparation for the day. And
Right.
it's like, I'm like 4:30. I'm like, I'm never ever going to do that because I just don't see the benefit outweighing the detrimental effect on my health. I think there are some people who, we know there are people who naturally get less sleep, and those are the people that can do that. I can't do that. I'm a long sleeper.
Yeah.
I like to sleep, and I tell the people I work with, I'm like, yeah, just don't expect that from me.
Yeah.
It's.
And that's the thing too. I think from both the provider's standpoint and also the patient or the client standpoint is like you said before too, with the Crohn's disease discussion, know what works for you. Try not to, just because you heard, successful people have morning and evening routines, etc. There's ways that you can be productive and efficient in your life and make it work for you without having
Absolutely.
to accommodate all these things. And then the other thing I had written down as well in that was, to kind of ask you, going back a little bit to what we were talking about before with health and wellness and your respects, what are some of your own routines? Do you have anything now that things are a little bit wonky with the world? Are there non-negotiables? I like asking people that too. Is it a non-negotiable for you, like you said, to kind of make sure you get quality sleep?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny because, again, it's one of those physician heal thyself issues.
Yes.
I know this is true of my parents. I know this is true of some of my coworkers and some of my friends. Everyone's going to bed later. And those of us that are able to are sleeping later. For the people who can't, now you're really having a problem because now you're jet lagged every day. You're getting less sleep than you want.
Right.
But everyone is phase shifting. Fortunately for me, I know how to fix it for myself. Most people don't, and most people don't even know that they can look up. And it's a very simple process of, how you use the light and how you use your sleep timing,
Right.
and you can readjust yourself. But you're talking, it takes 3 months to set your circadian rhythm. People who go to Europe for a week's vacation, they're like, oh my God, I'm totally screwed up because I'm jet lagged and the time difference. And I'm like, don't worry about it. You're fine. Your circadian rhythm will take back over and you'll be fine. You have to live there for 3 months and then come back, then call me and I'll fix you.
Gotcha. Before anything's screwed up.
Otherwise, wait another 2-3 days and then tell them, you'll see, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
But because we've been locked in for months, we are slowly resetting our clocks.
Yep.
And it's, I think the sleep labs, especially the ones that deal with insomnia and circadian rhythm disorders, are going to see a huge increase in patients. But for my own routines, sleep and eating wise.
Yeah.
Well,
Any health and wellness, anything you want to talk about.
I mean, normally I would always want to go to bed no later than midnight. And these days I find myself getting to bed between 1 and 2, like going to sleep between 1 and 2. And I'm a good solid 7 to 8 hour sleeper if I'm allowed to.
Right.
But and sharing custody of my kids, I'm sometimes able to and sometimes not able to. Especially when I have my little one, she's up and she's talking and ready to go. She's what we call a morning lark. She's up like a bird and ready to sing, and the rest of us are not. We're night owls.
Oh, I miss that energy.
Yeah, and I was just talking to her about energy today, and I was explaining to her about her energy and the difference between energy and speed, and I was like, yeah, I could beat you in a race, but you could run all day, and I just can't do that. And she's like, I do get tired, and I'm like, when? Just tell me when, so I know that's when I can get some rest. But and then I said, like, in the morning, I like to have a banana. I have a few prunes. I have my handful of walnuts. Mm-hmm. I have my black coffee. I've had to shift all of that a little bit because of the GERD, because I got to take my meds in the morning, and then you're not supposed to eat for an hour, which has been a little difficult because I really, really want my coffee. I'm a bit of a coffee snob. I only do espresso, so I make Americanos, and it took me several months of perfecting my dose, as they call it, when you're grinding the beans and all that. So it's hard to wait. But otherwise, we were talking about how exploring my culinary arts. I get a meat delivery, so I have grass-fed beef, 100% grass-fed. I have heritage pork, mm-hmm. free range chicken, and I get that every 6 weeks. And it's hard, especially because I know I'm not getting enough vegetables or as much as I would want. Right. It's hard to not constantly be like cooking a pork shoulder and just eat shredded pork, for days at a time.
Right.
And making ribeye steaks and all that. Normally I would spread that out, and I would, even though I'm nowhere near a vegetarian, I do see the benefit of having, like grains and vegetables as mm-hmm. a meal mm-hmm. to just help keep everything clean and,
round it out a bit
and balanced. Yeah. Exactly. And it's been harder. So the routine is, I would say, not routine.
Yeah, it's like you said before. I mean, we're coming up on, for sure, that 3-month mark of making or breaking a lot of us, I think. And in your case, you might be able to assimilate and accommodate some things, but you're not used to doing things that made you feel happy and stable and grounded in that way, because you had perfected them in some way. Yeah. So shifting this over does kind of throw off everything a little bit. So we are all feeling some pain in some way, and very empathetic, I hope, to each other. And so unfortunately, while I would love to speak to you for a year and a half on all different types of topics, I'm going to start wrapping up. But before I do, I want to find out a couple of things. First of all, is there anything that we did not necessarily touch upon that you felt you wanted to share? Because this is, the guests podcast and the guest platform, and whoever you feel you can kind of talk to, whoever that audience member is that you have in mind, to take some nugget away. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you feel like you might want to share now?
Well, I think when we talked about sleep, I'll address the big question that it's not the most often, the most frequent question I get. The most frequent question I get is, I had this really crazy dream. Can you tell me what it's about?
Oh, interesting.
And my answer to that is always, well, why don't you tell me what it's about?
Right.
And they're like, but you're the sleep specialist. And I'm like, yeah, but it was your dream. How do I know? Those books about dream interpretation analysis.
Right.
We're like, that's astrology. That's tarot.
Right.
That's not science. But otherwise, people always ask me about insomnia, either initiation insomnia, where they have a hard time falling asleep, or maintenance insomnia, where they can't stay asleep. And a lot of people don't realize that that's also insomnia. And what I tell people is, it is absolutely normal to have occasional insomnia. Mm-hmm. If it's anything more than, say, once a week, that's when you should really seek help.
Okay.
And, relaxation methods. I do a lot of mindfulness. I've been doing that for a couple of years now. And I tend to do it before bed because it relaxes me. Mm-hmm. Although most practitioners will tell you to do it like in the middle of the day. But there's lots of different relaxation techniques you can use. Progressive muscle relaxation, guided imagery. These are all things, you can look up, and they're very, very simple.
Okay.
And they all really work. Worries lists right now, especially with everybody not working and worried about bills and all that, write a list of all the things that are on your
Right.
mind that would keep you up at night, and then write a list of resolutions for each of those issues, even if it's something simple like try harder or make a phone call or anything like that. And then if those issues come up during the night, then you say, no, I've done this already.
I took care of it already. I'm
I
good.
took care of it. I know what to do tomorrow. I have a plan. You'd be surprised at how relieving that is. But just the idea that, people would come in and they would say, oh, I have insomnia. And, after asking all the necessary questions, I'd be like, you're absolutely normal.
Yeah.
I have these problems. I would never see those patients again. They would never come back because they were fine.
Right.
They would go home and they could sleep because they weren't worried anymore.
Right.
So, the occasional sleep problem is not a big deal. But if you are significantly sleepy, if you are fatigued, if you're tired, these are all different terms. They all mean different things.
Right.
If you have those issues, please don't just go to your general practitioner. Please seek out a sleep disorder specialist, because general practitioners have general knowledge and they're just going to give you some Ambien or tell you to suck it up. Go to a sleep specialist because there could be an underlying issue. You could have sleep apnea. It could be really disruptive snoring. You could have restless legs, all these different things. Yeah. So, seek out the people who can help you. But, again, the occasional issue with insomnia is absolutely normal, especially right now.
Yeah.
Especially with all the stress we're going through.
That's very helpful. I appreciate you saying that, because I think, well, a lot of people that are in my circle, we are all dealing with what is going on, and I can't take this anymore, and what is happening. So it's actually nice to know that a lot of people are going through the same thing. This is what is expected. And like you mentioned too, unless there's something that seems a little bit outside of that, or a little bit extreme, or that more of a pattern, right? Like the once in a while thing, not a big deal, but when we start seeing patterns. And similarly too, that the discussion about kind of taking ownership for, what you might be placing on yourself, and not that you mean to be doing that. Of course, there's worries, but there might be strategies and tools that can come help you alleviate that and get your mind off of things, or talking to a specialist in some way, therapist, etc., and people who could help support you, really takes that pressure off, I think, and then allows you to then focus a little bit better, and then everything kind of falls into play. Then you have better quality sleep, and maybe you're not snacking so much at midnight, and so on. That's very, very helpful. I really appreciate that, Jason.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
it's really, you're welcome. It's really amazing how all the different things can tie into each other. When you don't sleep well, then you end up depressed, and when you're depressed, you don't eat right, which causes problems with your sleep, and it becomes this vicious cycle. And as a sleep specialist, we always obviously attack the sleep, and sometimes I ended up treating someone's depression because I fixed their sleep.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you got to fix the depression to fix the sleep. Sometimes it's the other way.
Absolutely.
And the food, the correlates with food. I mean, some people are stress eaters.
Yeah.
I'm a boredom eater. And having kids, they always want some cookies and brownies, and I'm happy to make them. But if they don't eat them all, and then they're not here, I will eat it. Yeah. And they come back and they're like, "You ate my ice cream." I'm like, "It's not your ice cream; it was my ice cream. You weren't here."
Once you walk away, it defaults to being mine.
Exactly.
So Jason, I want to also ask a couple more questions before we do wrap up. The future you, I'm assuming we're going to still be in this predicament as, the next couple of months progress, but the future you, as far as, the years to come, are you pursuing anything in the culinary world or otherwise that, you enjoy doing, that support your habits, or wherever you see yourself going professionally, if there's anything that you want to share in that way?
Well, I do always dream, whenever I'm driving and I see an empty storefront, if it's in the right spot, it looks the right way, I'm like, okay, that's where I'm going to open my barbecue joint.
Oh, so cool.
I have a friend who still works in the film industry, and every once in a while I'll call him up and be like, "Dave, I found this spot. Let's drop everything. Let's do it." And he's my cooking partner in crime. We'll get together and do big meals.
I love that.
Otherwise, no, I don't have any culinary
pursuits.
Nothing that I'm pursuing.
And then my second to final question is, if people are interested in learning more about you or sharing their stories or telling you thank you for sharing yours, are you publicly available on social media or on LinkedIn or anything like that? If not, that's okay.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, just as my name, Jason Birnbaum. I don't have, I mean, I probably still have some web pages floating around that are just, because they're out there forever.
Yeah.
But
They never go away. I'm going to
yeah,
link, I'll link. I mean, you shared with me your handles and things, so I'll make sure I post
yeah,
that in the episode notes as well. And
yeah.
then my final question is, pun intended, everybody's going to get so sick of me saying that after a point, but what is on your plate today? So physically right now, when we hang up, what are you eating and what are you doing when we're done?
I have pizza dough that has been resting that I'm going to separate out and then put in the fridge for at least 2 days to ferment and then make some small pizzas over the next week or so. That's my next thing. I'm trying a new recipe. I don't know if I love it, but we'll see.
Okay.
And I did just bake 2 loaves of bread yesterday, so that's there. That's always there. Always trying to find something new to throw on top of a slice of sourdough.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of sardines. I love sardines, and it's great pandemic food.
Yes.
High in protein, high in omegas,
Indeed.
low in mercury.
Canned. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love it. Food pursuits. I do need to go and get some fruits and vegetables because I have almost nothing.
Nothing left out there. All right. So you got slim pickings and you're going to have to go forage.
The stores have plenty.
Right.
We're good out here. It's just having the time and opportunity to go and get more.
It is a bit of a production these days. Yeah.
I missed sour cherry picking, which is a very short. It's like a week and a half, and I missed it because that's my favorite pie is sour cherries.
Yeah.
So I missed that. And there's some blueberry picking going on, which I'm going to try and do when I go to pick up a pie because I'm going to see my family on Sunday to celebrate anniversaries and graduations and all that stuff.
Oh, that's nice. That's very lovely.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Yeah. Well, Jason, it has been a pleasure having you on the podcast. And I am so delighted to be able to talk to you about all these different things, because even though we have known each other for 18 years, I don't think this has been the longest conversation I think we've ever had.
Definitely the longest one-on-one conversation for sure.
So thank you so much.
The pleasure has been all mine, really. And I'm so happy that you invited me to do this. And if you ever want to do more stuff on sleep and stuff, let me know.
I will absolutely. There might be a part 2. There might be some sort of panel discussion, bonus episode.
I'm always, once people find out that I work in sleep, questions always come at me, no matter what career I've been in.
Yes.
And I'm always willing to help people.
Thank you so much for joining me this week on the Dish with Dina podcast. I am Dina D'Alessandro, registered dietitian, nutritionist, founder, and chief executive life changer at Dish with Dina, and I'm also your host. If you like what you heard, I would be so grateful if you could subscribe to this podcast, leave a review, and share this with others who you think might benefit from what we have to offer on these episodes. You can also join my mailing list at dishwithdina.com or email me at info@dishwithdina.com with questions, comments, feedback, and if you'd like to be a guest on a future episode, because everybody eats and we all have a story to share. I hope you tune back in next week when we dish again.